You are the blade that splits my soul. A burning wound bled without control. Each breath you take, I crave as mine. A twisted darkness, us intertwined. I seek to haunt your shadow's frame. Our love a whispering curse of shame. Your fate I will bind, my dark heart, for eternity searing, our souls never to part.
Can a vampire love you? Or is their heart as empty as the abyss? Welcome to Ravenloft. Ravenloft is a sub-region and sub-campaign setting in the Forgotten Realms, the universe of Dungeons & Dragons that's used by the Wizards of the Coast, and thus Baldur's Gate 3. This means everything in the Forgotten Realms and Ravenloft is also canon to Baldur's Gate 3, and vice versa because Baldur's Gate games are often also referenced in Forgotten Realms material. So, this is your trigger warning. We'll be discussing how D&D is canon to Baldur's Gate 3. So if you're someone who hates having your own version of the game called into question, you're probably not going to like this video, but you have been warned. However, for those of you who love diving into lore, fangirling so hard for vampires, and love a good dark fantasy romance, then you're in the right place, babe. And with that, let's find out if a true vampire can actually love you. Before we can take the dive, you're going to need to divorce yourself from whatever definition you apply to love. In the Forgotten Realms, different creatures experience love differently, and I don't just mean romantically. Love in the Forgotten Realms can be pure, or it can be twisted. What may seem like darkness, toxicity, or unbridled obsession and possession, that can also be a form of love, albeit a very dark form of love, but a form nonetheless. As a side note, I wanted to highlight some of the comments that were made on the Vampire Bride video. Some people brought up some fabulous observations that Ascended Astarion is a living vampire. As Raphael explains,
all the strengths of his vampiric form will be amplified, and alongside them he will enjoy the luxuries of the living. The arousals and appetites of man will return to him. And unlike Astarion, he will have no need of a parasite to protect him from the sun.
So a lot of what makes a human, Astarion would regain. One of my favorite comments on this topic that had some additional points was made by I Am Kitty, Baldur's Gate 3. I'll pop that comment up here on the screen. I've seen both of these scenes that are being referenced. I don't currently have footage on them, but I'm going to address them verbally. In Astarion's origin, our heart does beat again, which is something that a normal true vampire wouldn't have. If Tav becomes an Illithid, in the epilogue we do smell the hormones of love from Astarion, and I wanted to thank you for bringing both of those points up. So while we talk about vampire love in the Forgotten Realms today, please keep in mind that although I'll be using a lot of Astarion footage and referencing Astarion from time to time, that as an Ascended, he is a new breed of vampire, so he could experience love in a different standard than other true vampires like Strahd or Jand or Sunstar. In this video, we may discuss some topics that involve adult situations that go beyond kissing. So to appease my YouTube overlords, I will be replacing any XXX words with the term spicy. Thank you for your understanding. And if you want more vampire content, drop us some bat emojis. But if you want more D&D lore in general, give me some roses. And yes, my darlings, you can give me both. Both is always good. So lock in, relax, because we're about to go a little deep. Vampires are evil, and that isn't something that's up for debate. Even as various editions have come out and added additions and revisions to vampires, they've always been evil. According to the Monster Manual 1st edition, vampires entered the Forgotten Realms as chaotic evils. Starting in the Monster Manual 4th edition, vampires became a generic evil, neither lawful nor chaotic. And finally now, in the Monster Manual 5th edition, vampires were lawful evil. There's no question in the lore that true vampires are evil by nature. The process of becoming a vampiric creature involves the twisting of a soul and can result in the loss of one's soul entirely. In fact, according to the Manual of the Plains 3rd edition, Undead and constructs did not usually have souls either, though the creatures from which they were constructed or raised might have. However, according to Open Grave, a manual dedicated to the undead, quote, they did not cast shadows, had no reflections in mirrors, and moved in complete silence. However, the sages claimed vampires retained their souls after turning. Because these manuals, even though both are from the same round of editions, contradict one another, it can be a source of argument among GMs and DMs if vampires retain their souls or not. The reason this is key is because to be able to love, one must typically, though not always, have a soul. As Open Grave is a manual dedicated to the undead, it has the ability to dive deeper than the normal monster manual. Thus, it is more correct and complete for an appendix. So for my campaigns and for this video, we'll be following the Guide of the Sages and operate with the idea that some vampires do indeed retain their souls. However, keep in mind that having a soul does not make them less an evil alignment, nor does being evil mean that they're unable to experience love. We all love a good villain arc with a love interest, because as a society, we're capable of realizing that love, it's not cut and dry or black and white. It can be experienced by even the most vile and evil of individuals. So, do vampires feel emotions? Yes, but not in the same fashion, speed, or spectrum as they did as a mortal. According to both the Monster Manual 3.5 and the Monster Manual 5th edition, quote, whatever attachments and affections they had towards things or people from their life are all changed and corrupted by the transformation. Love is flipped into obsession, and the feeling of friendship is made into a feeling of jealousy. Many vampires become obsessed and fixated on the things they desired in the past. Those who once sought love become predators searching for beauty and companionship in their victims, and those who valued youth could fixate on children, hoping to snuff out their future potential. I know that was a long quote, but you kind of needed it in its entirety. This is also the most commonly referenced quote across all of the different sites and sources, so that's why it was really key to share it. We don't know much about the history of Cazador, but what we do know is he had a, air quotes, niece, Amanita Sar, the Lady Incognita. Reading the book, I'm going to butcher this, Outterak 1477, found in a stack of scrolls in the Sar Palace attic, we discover that she was only 13 when she was turned. That and a couple of other small nuggets here or there imply that he might have been obsessed with youth and or familial connections himself. If you'd like a theory video on this obsession, please let me know in the comments. Unlike my other videos so far that rely heavily on officially published materials in the Forgotten Realms, a video on Cazador would be a true theory-based video. Now, on how vampires have heightened and extended emotional reactions. According to the Monstrous Compendium Volume 1, to paraphrase multiple passages, vampires can take centuries to fully enact their revenge schemes or plots to achieve their obsessions. These emotions are not bound to the confines of time like humanoids, nor are their timeless natures inclined to forget the pull of an emotion. And all while having their heightened emotions, they also express those emotions differently. They lack compassion, they lack empathy. A vampire is just as likely to devour your screaming beloved in front of you, then smile, blood still dripping down their lips, and continue on with their demands for you without so much as a change in their cool tone. They can feel a spectrum of emotions, mainly those that are negative or all-consuming. And if it was once a good emotion like happiness or love, it becomes twisted into a darkly toxic version of itself. However, do know they don't feel all human emotions. So, can vampires feel love? Yes. I know this is a pain point in a lot of online discussions, so making a definitive statement on it might feel out of place in the D&D and Baldur's Gate 3 discourse. There are some who believe that vampires cannot love, based mainly on how it's an obsession for a vampire, and often from quotes that are taken out of context. The idea that vampires cannot love in D&D is one of those rumor weeds. It started at some point in a small and seemingly harmless setting, but through essentially a game of internet telephone, it expanded to a common misconception, and not one that I blame anyone for having. If you're someone who still hasn't divorced yourself from the modern definition of love, it's easy to see a vampire's love as nothing more than a control or a power lust. However, keep in mind that quote from 3.5 and 5th edition earlier, quote, "Love was flipped into obsession and friendships were made into feelings of jealousy." Note that statement. Love was flipped. That love is still there, but it isn't compassionate or empathetic love between equal partners. It's an obsession, a never-ending and soul-consuming obsession. That's the reason vampire brides exist. They're the literal manifestation of possessing the individual you have an obsessive love for eternity, enslaving them to you emotionally so that you will always have to love them in return. Obsession isn't something exclusive to D&D vampires either. Obsession being an expression or replacement for traditional feelings of love is as old as Dracula himself. It spawns from their overwhelming hunger, a desire to possess. And those two things together are a terrifying combination. Before we jump into the types of love and love-like emotions vampires have, we need one more thing to click. You. If you're enjoying this content, please consider leaving a like or a comment. I love having you here, and I love my subscribers. And when you leave me comments, it helps me know what you want to know more about, and it helps us build our community together. And when you like a video, that also helps me know what types of videos you want me to serve up to you. I love me some juicy lore, but I still want to know what types of videos you want to sink your teeth into. Hunger is the driving force for vampires. As discussed in the Vampire Bride video, Jaheira says, quote, "They say the only thing a vampire can feel is hunger." And she isn't the only person making a similar statement on vampiric hunger. As Astarion says,
"All of a vampire's hunger, but few of their powers."
After you turn him, he becomes an ascended vampire, a vampire who can have the experiences of humanity again. He mentions how he finally doesn't feel that hunger.
"I can't feel it. That ache in my stomach, that hunger, it's gone."
Vampire hunger is not limited to a hunger for blood, however. They hunger for control, possession, spicy arrivals, and most of all, power. A vampire's love is, as we addressed, an obsession. But it's also a hunger. They hunger for something, and having what they're obsessed with sates that hunger. Vampires in a lot of fiction are often spicyalized and objectified because of their hungers for the flesh. Even Cazador twisted his spawn's hunger for sins of the spice into a weapon, making what should have been a natural part of their curse into SA, thus making their hunger something they could never truly sate, because unless they found healing, it would forever be tainted. Jealousy, the twisted turn from friend to foe. Vampires are extremely jealous and envious creatures. They have a strong urge to possess anything they desire, but their envious nature causes them to desire more than they can reasonably obtain. As noted in the Monstrous Compendium Volume 1, to paraphrase, vampires become obsessed with possessions, such as collecting art, trophies, decorations, etc. However, they're also known to collect spawn, human victims, and lovers. Keep in mind, when I say lovers, I'm not talking about mates. These lovers could be made into vampire brides or spawn, but they're temporary collections, something to discard when no longer viable. They are not bonding with these lovers. Vampires can be known to even kill for what they wish to obtain, and that includes love. As an example, Strahd, who in the Curse of Strahd killed his own brother Sergei so he could claim his sister-in-law to be, Tatiana, as his own. And all of this leads to obsession, the primary expression of love in vampires. What begins as hunger and jealousy blossoms into a vampire's twisted version of love. A vampire heart will be consumed by their obsession much the same way as one might be consumed by a desire for the nearness of a loved one. Strahd's a great example of obsession. In his curse, Tatiana kept being reincarnated, and he has found her by chasing her down and forcing her into his embrace once more, over and over again. Whereas another great example is Jander Sunstar, who fell in love with Anna, one of Tatiana's reincarnations. According to the villain's lore book, she refused to turn for him, and when she was dying of illness, he let her die in his arms, and in a fit of rage, he slaughtered the whole asylum that once housed her, Jonder then discovered her past as Tatiana, and he swore revenge. He chased down his revenge for 25 years before becoming bitter enemies with Strahd. He then attempted to sell his life and soul to Lathander in exchange for victory. Sadly, however, Strahd survived their battle. With all of these stories focusing on Tatiana's reincarnations, I'm starting to think that she's vampire catnip, to quote Sadie's book, The Broken Bloodlines. Unlike other humanoids, a vampire's love is forever. When I say this, I don't mean their desires. I mean the force behind them. For example, let's create a vampire character. His name will be Malice. In life, Malice was a father. He lost his child daughter when she was only 5 years old. He loved her fiercely and never recovered from her loss. When he became a vampire, his love for his daughter became twisted. He now has an obsession with finding a new daughter to take her place and fill that void in his heart. Malice's tainted familial love drives him to capture children and turn them. When they're unable to replace his daughter, because they aren't her, he grows tired of his new spawn and throws them away. He treats them as disposable pawns or literally destroys them. His temporary interest was in the spawned children, but his love for his daughter, that's what's eternal. He'll always be obsessed with her, but because she's already dead, he'll never fill that void. His obsession will drive him for the rest of eternity. The same thing applies to romantic love. This is why vampire brides, or as Larian calls them, dark consorts, exist. They're the manifestation of making someone you love into the eternal puzzle piece that can fill the void in your soul. So what happens to a vampire bride if her master dies? Can they love again? Yes, they possibly can. Vampire brides are something between a spawn and a true vampire. They have all of the same powers of a true vampire, but they're still enthralled emotionally, like how a spawn is enthralled physically. So if their master dies, they would become a true vampire in all ways, as their control is finally broken. In fact, if a vampire master dies, their bride who was their mate will then have control over the master's other spawn. However, that being said, remember vampires are driven to obsess over what they longed for in life. So if the victim who was turned into a vampire bride wasn't in love with their master, they would be able to find love again. They would have a whole different set of obsessions. However, if they were in love with their master, for example, if this were to happen to Tav, they wouldn't ever love again. And depending on the depth of their devotion, they might lose their sanity or their will to live altogether. On the counter side, if a vampire bride, who is their mate, dies, a master will not love again. They may continue to attempt to fill their void, just like how Malice did with trying to replace his daughter. This is something Strahd would do in between reincarnations. Tatiana was the love of his life, but far from his only bride, spawn, or lover. However, he never ever loved anyone else, and when she would return, he would always become hyper-focused on getting her back. So in a world which Astarion loves Tav, losing Tav would shatter him as a vampire master. Since he's a new type of vampire, there's no context on how he'd specifically act. But if an Ascendant was similar to a normal true vampire, he would then be looking for someone to replace Tav constantly, but would fail over and over again because there would never be someone else for him to love. So I know we did get a little dark romance book talk girly up in here today, but I'm not mad. I love a good twisted love story. And I do love when a second book introduces a character falling in love with a villain who ruined their life. But I mean, that's a story for another day, and I'm not ready to go into that just yet. So vampires do feel love. They just don't feel love the way that you or I do. So hopefully with the source materials and explanations, we've put that nasty little myth to rest. I don't want to see it rising again in 24 hours like it's a spawn. And before we go, I want to thank you all for being here with me, because writing and gaming, they're my passions. And with subscribers like you, I'm able to share those passions. Jump scare, it's my face. But I wanted to actually come on and show how excited I am, not just talk how excited I am. So you probably saw that slightly offhanded comment about villains, but really it's not that offhanded. because today I'm announcing my pre-order for the second book, which is where we're gonna start getting Polly and its enemies to lovers. So if you love a really good dark romance with a vampire baddie who turns good, but only for you, then come and join me. And I hope to see you again in the next one, darling.
And now you're all mine. And I'm all yours. Until morning, at least.